This is the 1.6 gallon version of the American Standard Neolo toilet. Introduced sometime around the early to mid 1990s, it pretty much replaced the 3.5 gallon version and was made up until 2013. This is a pretty interesting looking double mounted toilet until you realize that it's basically just the 1.6 Madera again, but it's double mounted and altered a bit. That much being said, this toilet really isn't anything special, and we'll see why today. The overall design of this is pretty interesting. As mentioned, this is a double mounted toilet, so it goes out the back outlet. But you can kind of see that the similarities to the 1.6 Madera are kind of there, especially the front fed siphon jet. The base looks a bit weird, not going to lie, but it does have a pretty interesting design overall. The Trapway opening is basically a squared version of the 1.6 Madera. It even has that little mountain, as I'll call it, for the siphon jet. And let's have a look at a flush. I don't know if this one has a shorter flush than usual, or that's just how it's made, but the flush itself seems a bit rushed. Since this is pretty much a 1.6 Madera again, it carries over some of the problems from that. One being the flush not being very interesting. Honestly, I think the flush is worse on this. I don't know if that's how it's the design or just, its quality control, which, by the way, is very crap, as you can see. But it's definitely a bit more lacking, which really isn't saying much. The pull itself also isn't as great, which really isn't saying much considering the 1.6 Madera is pretty so-so with its pull factor. I think it's a little bit worse, and I think it really has to do with the flush. It's more involved with swirling, which sounds nice on paper, but the pull factor takes a hit. I also would like to bring up that the performance is a little bit less good compared to the 1.6 Madera, but it's still perfectly serviceable, but nothing really beyond that. Now let's have a look at ball rinse. It honestly looks about the same as a 1.6 Madera, but I think the rinse would be a little bit worse off. Slightly. I think the back row would definitely struggle a little bit, and even sometimes the front row will probably struggle. Despite it looking like it'll be competent, the ball rinse is still crap, which isn't a good sign. And that's pretty much the 1.6 Neolo. Nothing really to write home about, and honestly, nothing really special. Yeah, it's rare and not something you see every day, but honestly, it's just a double mounted Madera, and it's not any more special than that. But let's grade it. The design of the 1.6 gallon Neolo is basically a combination of both basic and goofy. Honestly, it looks pretty simplistic when you first look at it, but the more you look at it closely, it just looks so stupid. Honestly, I can kind of appreciate the goofy design, but overall it gets a 5. Like the 1.6 Madera, this thing has some pretty crap quality control. I might argue even worse, but honestly I think it's about the same. Some aspects are better or worse on this compared to the 1.6 Madera. Like, for example, the ball rinse factor is about the same. There are some worse aspects about this, like the Trapway and the performance, but we'll get to those when we get to those. But the quality control is about the same as the 1.6 Madera, and it gets a 3. One thing this has going over the 1.6 Madera is consistency. It's actually pretty consistent, and rarely will you see one that looks pretty off. Like most of the ones I've seen online and in person look pretty similar to one another, maybe some slight defects, but some that you won't really notice right off the bat. Overall, the consistency is pretty good, and I give it an 8. The Trapway is almost similar to the 1.6 Madera, except that it doesn't go down, it goes back. Since it goes out the back, it has a bend at the end, and that might screw some things up a little bit, and not for the better. The Trapway is still 2 inches, similar to how most 1.6 Maderas were made, but besides that, I think the Trapway is a tad bit worse because of that bend. Because of that, I'm giving it a 5. The flush on this is a little bit different than the 1.6 Madera. instead of flushing more like a 1.6 aft wall, but worse. I mean, it flushes very similarly to that, but just two main things drawing it back. One, I noticed that these tend to have a little bit more shorter flushes. Whether it be the water distribution being a little bit wonky or just quality control issues, it's hard to say. Whether this is a consistency issue is beyond me. And two, I just think the flush just starts a little bit later than, the 1.6 Madera, which it blows up first and then starts swirling after. But this it goes for the 1.6 aft wall approach, but it just lacks a lot more. I give the flush a 4. This thing definitely shreds a lot more. There's just no arguing about it. The pull on this is just not great. I think it's because of the lackluster flush, it screws it over pretty badly. Not to mention, some of these can have pretty short flushes. Whether it be by design issues or actual water issues, who knows at this point. But it's definitely not good. Not completely terrible, but still not good. I give it a 4. Performance for the most part seems okay, but compared to the 1.6 Madera, it does lack a good bit. And I do think it has to do with that bend at the end. The performance on these don't seem to be as good, but it's still not the worst thing in the world. It still performs a little bit better than some other toilets from this timeline, but honestly, is that really saying much? I think the performance gets a 6 at the most. Like the 1.6 Madera, the bowens on the Neolo is crap. I mean, it just has the same problem. It looks like it would rinse good, but it just misses so many areas that you would think that it wouldn't miss. The back rim, even the front struggles sometimes. It's just a mess. And you think, for having angled rim jets, this would rinse good, right? It doesn't. Like the 1.6 Madera, it gets a 3. Survivability for the most part seems okay, but honestly, I think the quality issues are a bit worse on this compared to the 1.6 Madera, which again really isn't saying much, and honestly, I think I'll come back to bite this thing pretty hard. I give it a 6 at most for now. Okay, let's talk about the overall value of this toilet. The synopsis for this thing I've heard from many people is that this is basically the better 1.6 Madera. I'm here to tell you that is a load of crap. This thing is just as bad, if not worse, than the 1.6 Madera. This thing has all the quality control issues that the 1.6 Madera has, and some of it better, some of it worse. Like for instance, the consistency is definitely a lot better. But in return, the balance is still just as crap, and honestly the performance and even the pull factor take a hit in this. And honestly the flush seems even worse, which is kind of hard to believe at first, but then you look at it and you go, yeah, this is a bit worse. I'm here to put this myth to rest that the 1.6 Neolo is better than the 1.6 Madera. It's about the same toilet, maybe a bit worse. Because of that, the value is a 3. The final score of the 1.6 gallon American Standard Neolo toilet is a 47 out of 100. I did not expect much from these going in, and honestly, I'm not surprised that's the result of this. This is basically just a 1.6 gallon Madera, but slightly worse. And its back outlet. That's basically this toilet in a nutshell. This thing basically carries over the problems of the 1.6 Madera, if not worse, in some aspects. And that's about all I can say. This toilet just isn't great.